Well, the idea actually started out because Nicholas De Piro had this wonderful idea of showing an aspect of Maltese heritage which is never exposed or people had never thought about at the time, which is obviously costume.
It was an unbelievable experience. There were the very smart, the very grand, and even the more humble, which also some of them were very interesting, with the wonderful weaves in wool and in cotton. Everybody went, we couldn't believe it was us. We were talking about us Maltese. It was a wonderful feeling for all of us. Quite early on in the days of Patrimonio, I remember a discussion. What is our next exhibition going to be about? But obviously, Patrimonio Malta, we wanted to have something which will stimulate our feelings for Malta and make us look at things. And I came out with the idea of costume. And the reaction of the people with me, I remember Maurice De Giorgio and others, and say, "Do you mean clothes?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Could it be interesting enough?" I said, "I think it will be." But they told me, "Why don't you go and come up with something? Go and have a look." And I did exactly that. I went up to Mdina, to a wonderful old house, and the person there opened a bureau drawer, and out came an 18th century dress, which was absolutely exquisite, in perfect condition. And I said, "Wow," I said, "I am impressed." Then I took a photograph of it, and I went to a friend of mine in Attire, and he said, "I've got a few bits and pieces." I took a few photographs there, and at our next Patrimonio meeting, I showed them, and everybody, it was unanimous. He said, "Yes, these are treasures which aren't being seen by anybody and are not available in the museums."
We can say that Fondazione Patrimonio at the time was much smaller. It was made up of mostly of a group of friends who had this wonderful idea of bringing out what there is in private collections to the public eye.
Din l-exhibition l-għonet kienet l-ewwel waħda tat-tip li sar. U ħarġu ħafna affarijiet minnha. Aħna nafu li dejjem Malta kif illum, dejjem kellna l-barranin ġejjin u sejrin. Allura l-influenza tal-barrani dejjem kienet hawn. Li innotajna pereżempju l-moda dejjem tidħol naqra iktar tard. U b'naqra twist, jiena forsi jekk jiena qabel ġakkettina tal-istess perjodu ma l-insib pereżempju il-Victorian Albert jew Pitti Firenze. Dejjem ikun hemm dik naqra twist u dik tagħmilha xi ħaġa tagħna.
I was a theatre historian, and they were originally thinking of creating the Manuel Theatre Museum, and they wanted to exhibit some costumes. So they asked me to go and speak to them about theatre history, the Manuel Theatre, etc., because they used to do their research. And I went there and we started looking at costumes, and obviously I am not an expert in costume. So they actually went to the Musée Galliera in Paris, and the Musée Galliera recommended Nathalie Jekyll, who is a specialist in costume, and she came over to do two things. One, to identify the costumes that had sort of that were of worth to expose because they were historically interesting, and also to teach us how to create mannequins based on the costume, so that it would seem as though the costume is standing alone.
At that time I was at university, and I had lectures with Dr. Vicky Cremona, and she introduced me to Mr. De Giorgio, who was the chairman at the time of Fondazione Patrimonio Malti, because she knew I was hands-on, academic, a bit of art history as well, so I was kind of one of the right guys to help out with the mannequins.
Setting up an exhibition like the costume exhibition requires a lot of time and preparation and effort. I was involved as from 3 years prior to the opening of the exhibition itself. And one of the earliest jobs that I was involved in was visiting private collections of people who had so generously offered to lend their items of clothing from their ancestors, their grandparents, their aunties. It was such an exciting experience because every time you went into a new household, all these new treasures were being unearthed.
Going into people's homes and people bringing out these treasures, which in certain cases they didn't even realize they were treasures. They sort of thought they were old clothes, when these were absolute discoveries for us, like, for example, there was a dress which actually had a attire weave, and that was very, very interesting. Or else, the biggest treasure trove I ever found was at the Gozo Folklore Museum. We had gone to the folklore museum, and we said, "Do you have any clothes?" And they said, "Well, we've got very few, really, but let's go to the store." And their store is kind of above in the ceiling of one of the rooms, and they were sort of saying, look, there's nothing. And I was desperate, so I kind of climbed this steps which were pulled down, and I was looking very like, sort of, I almost say like a machine gun, looking to see what I could see. And in a corner I saw a big bale of cloth, and I said, "But what's that?" I said, "Oh, I don't know. Well, let's bring it down." So we brought it down, and we opened it, and we found a lot of clothes which had disintegrated, completely disintegrated. But we also found a lot of shoes. And in the middle of this disintegrated mass of clothing, we found one of our most stunning dresses, which was a Victorian dress with a bustle and a train and a jacket in 2 colors. It was amazing, and it was so we were all stunned. Even the people at the museum too were saying, "My goodness, I mean, how we didn't know about this, kind of, because it was really hidden, this bale." And thanks to that, all the shoes we could exhibit of different periods mostly came from the Gozo Museum. So that was really a fantastic discovery. And what was important was the fact that discovery is part of Maltese heritage, because it belongs to a national museum.
Du fragst mich, Mädchen, was wirst du der weißt?
Following this exercise, which took a very long time, this visiting of households to select items for the exhibition, then the next phase was to bring those items to the workshop, which at the time was at the Manuel Theatre. And there a very long and very important job of cataloguing these items started, because of course when you are entrusted with people's precious items, you cannot afford to have them damaged or to lose any of them. And we had over 1,000 items.
Jiena kont nkun fis-sala fuq it-Teatru Manuel, għax hemmhekk il-post fejn konna naħdmu. Ovvjament kull darba li jiġi xi ħaġa ġdida għajnejna kulħadd miftuħin vera biex naraw xem, il-sorpriza, nkollu sorpriza. Kull kostum li kien jidħol l-għonet t-tċekja jekk għandu xinsetti. Għax importanti li ma jkollokx infestazzjoni, għax inkella tirrovina kollox. Kien importanti wkoll li tiddokumenta kull wieħed, għax l-għonet kien hemm ħafna private lenders. Ir-ritratti sfida għax il-kamera kienet il-kamera li kienet, ma kienx hawn id-digital kamera, u tieħu wkoll pereżempju l-istat tal-oġġett. U jekk ikollok data, jiena forsi tista' tgħid 20th century jew first quarter ta' 19th century, tagħmilha jisa f'kuntest. Dan kien importanti tal-proċess għax għalkemm aħna nafu li kien hemm jisu mal-140 biċċa xogħol esebiti, fir-realtà kien hemm xi 400 biċċa li daħlu f'dil kamra żgħira. U biex wieħed jażel minnhom, tgħidli imma ma kienx hemm lok li jsiru iktar. L-ewwel nett il-ħin kien hemm min kien stat tajjeb. Jiġifieri orret xorta tnaddaf u tara li jkun stabbli biex jiġi sebit. Però kien hemm minnhom li kellhom ix-xogħol. Issa dil-problema mhix għax l-owner ikun traskurat, aħna l-ambjent li ngħixu fih, id-dawl, l-umdità, l-użu, għax daw wara kollox, qatt ma kienu exhibition pieces, libsa inti tħita mhux biex tħallija fil-kexxun.
Preparing for an exhibition on costume requires a lot of specialized knowledge because, costumes have to be exhibited in a very specific way. And there was nobody in Malta who was trained on this. So Mr. Maurice De Giorgio had organized to get these experts from abroad. There was first Nathalie Jekyll, who was a conservator. She worked in Lyon. Lyon is a very famous city for textiles. And she taught us how to make mannequins using paper. That was the technique that was used for the manual theatre costumes. Eventually, two other experts were brought over from Denmark. The first one was Karin Jacobi, who was also a conservator, but she worked at the time at the National Danish Collection, and she had set up these magnificent exhibitions with tailor-made mannequins made from chicken wire and plaster. And she taught us that technique, which was the one which we eventually used for all the mannequins in the exhibition.
So first of all, we had quite a big range of different types of costumes, that is from common people to more dressy and ceremonial type of dresses. And so we had to adapt to even different types of physiognomy of people. The most fascinating thing about it is that normally you get a dress and you get a mannequin, and that's it. In this case, it was very different. You had to kind of recreate the person who used to wear that particular dress. And that was very interesting because, that once you wear the dress for a long time, the dress itself will take a very particular shape. And that was very interesting to actually find out the shape that person was underneath that garment, for example. And so obviously with practice you have to take particular measures of different parts of the costume, and you start building up the mannequin. Now there were two different techniques. The first one with the Danish style was that you completely create the structure out of wire mesh, like chicken wire. So it's like it starts with a tube, and then you start kind of folding it to shape up the body according to the measures of the costume. And so the result would be something like this. On the other hand, with the French style, it was a bit different because you would use a normal mannequin, again using the measurements of the costume, but then you add foam to it and cling film around to shape up until you get the desired shape. After that, and then you start covering with paper, There's a whole process to that until you get, the exact shape that you need underneath. It's important to note also the style that we adopted, the way we wanted our costume to look, so that we completely focus on the costume, is that we eliminate all the body parts from the mannequin, so that you will see only the costume. So basically you will see the costume around, for example, the neck part, and you will not be able to see the person underneath. So it's like, a kind of a ghost person underneath the costume.